Welcome to Not Small Talk. I am your host, Elijah James. I was sitting here pondering what the perfect introduction would be to grab the listener and hook them in. The same thought process I had when I first started writing, ironically. But after a few deep breaths to blow away the anxious devil on my shoulder, I decided to settle with a little honesty. So here it is. The objective of this podcast is to serve man, as in mankind, not the cookbook. I believe that an absolute that has always been in this world is suffering. It's the yang to life's yin. All living things suffer. You can see it through nature, growth, decay, transformation. Everything living at some point will die. That's the cycle of life, and that's okay. I feel suffering is readily apparent, now more than ever, in our society with statistics of widespread mental illness polluting the country and without a doubt the globe. Not to mention all of the ailments and lifestyle choices that affect people's lives daily. With that being said, mental illness and lifestyle are huge focuses in this podcast, and I will be using circumstances and situations to further my point, respectfully, of course. This podcast is meant to help people, nothing more, nothing less. I will do this through forms of literature, media, and art. For example, in episode 2, we'll be diving into The Art of Living by Sharon LaBelle. This book is Sharon's interpretation of Epictetus' The Art of Living, which follows the philosophy Stoicism. Now let me be clear. This isn't a Stoicism podcast. It is a philosophy podcast. We will discuss other philosophies in the future such as Buddhism, nihilism, existentialism, hedonism, rationalism, and more, but not in that particular order. Now I know that sounds scary, but we have a long way to go before we arrive at half of those philosophies. So let's focus on the now and stay present, which is perfect because we're starting with Stoicism, a grandfather of philosophy, and we're starting with Epictetus' work, who is a grandfather of Stoicism. And we're using Sharon's interpretation. But I don't believe she's the grandfather, so sadly, this can't come in threes and our Holy Trinity can't be complete. Sorry, I need to stick to Stoicism. We're not discussing the Christian philosophy at the moment. And how could I forget? What is philosophy, actually? Well, the origin of the word philosophy is derived from the Greek word, philosophia, which means love of wisdom, which is quite fitting in my opinion. Philosophy, to me, is the study of fundamental subjects inside of our reality through intentionally aware conscious thoughts and reasoning. Being conscious in your thoughts and reasoning is the most important part of philosophy. To be conscious is to be aware of yourself and your surroundings. To be conscious is to be able to utter the statement, I am me and they are them, and to not only know what you are saying, but to understand the distinction between me and them. It is an amazing tool that humans have, unlike most living things, as far as we know. But it is used pretty much sparingly by the human species, now more than ever. Our consciousness, coupled with our high intellect and our unique ability to communicate with language, allows us to be able to do amazing things and express complex ideas and emotions in numerous ways, such as songs, poetry, speeches, everyday dialogue, text, and this podcast, ironically. Philosophy is using this special gift to attempt to actively understand the world around us, and always ask the questions, why? Why are we here? Is there a purpose and meaning to this life? And if so, what is it? Each philosophy that exists is its own separate philosophy, some having similarities and differences with one another, but each being its own separate school of thought nonetheless. If you still do not understand what philosophy is, I'd like to tell you a kind of brief story about a French philosopher, René Descartes, who some consider the father of modern philosophy, and he is credited with beginning the school of thought called rationalism. He understood that our senses could deceive us, such as an object being distorted when looking at it through a glass of water, or a mirage in the desert. So he questioned if his existence itself was a deception. But then he realized that him being consciously aware of the doubting of his own thought, senses, and existence proved the existence of his mind. Thus the famous quote, cogito ergo sum, or the English translation, I think, therefore I am. When experiencing deep introspective thought, much like Descartes, we are philosophizing, and much like Descartes, we think, therefore we are philosophers. Just a moment ago, I stated that in episode 2, we'll be diving into Sharon LaBelle's interpretation of The Art of Living, and I'm assuming some of you are going, well, this is episode 0, and are thinking to yourselves, why would I listen to this guy's podcast? He can't even count to 3, and he can't even pronounce Descartes right. I promise you, I can, but I'm not going to. so you never hear the evidence to back my claim. So for now, it'll remain an opinion. All jokes aside, episode 1 is titled Epictetus' Spirit, and it will be an introduction to the art of living, Epictetus, and the philosophy of Stoicism. With the end of this podcast nearing, I'd like to conclude it by saying, if you are listening to this podcast right now, that means you are alive, which means it's not over. Stay positive.